What you are going to learn will make you look at raising your children in an entirely different way. This horrifying account of a 17-year-old girl who was brutally murdered and buried in a cemetery by her boyfriend, and I strongly feel that watching this video could save your child's life. Jayden Parkinson was a girl who emanated pleasure and a love for life here. Slightly naughty temperament harmoniously mixed with her inherent beauty from her early years, there was a special. The link between Jayden and her mother is filled with love and trust. The girl's openness and kindness helped her acquire many friends at school. Everyone who met Jayden recognized her sensitivity and cheerfulness. His personality and compassionate heart. Academics came naturally to her, and her dream of becoming a hairstylist inspired her to continue forward. But at the age of 7, Jayden's life made a significant turn. Her parents decided to split custody of the girl, as well as her brother and sisters was unexpectedly handed to her father by the court. Together with the children, he moved to Oxford in the United Kingdom. This transfer was a great shock for the Parkinson family, especially for the youngsters who were acclimated to the atmosphere of love created by both parents. They missed the fun holidays and nice surprises that mom and dad would plan to delight them. It remained a mystery how the father managed to get custody of the children. It was evident to everyone that this choice was a huge blow to both the children and their mother. It hit Jayden especially hard, as she had an exceptionally tight bond with her mom. Family friends said there were no evident problems or negativity between the couple. Nevertheless, despite all efforts, the mother failed to fight for her right to stay with the children. The teenage years brought new problems for Jayden. Irrepressible vitality and awakened rebellious spirit hindered her father's attempts to cope with his daughter's upbringing. Despite the fact that the youngster preserved her warmth, charm, and excellent sense of humor, she had typical issues of the transitional period. Notably, after moving to high school, relations with her father grew increasingly tense. Despite his honest attempts to surround the children with compassion and provide them with whatever kids needed, nevertheless, he was harder and more demanding compared to their mother. At this age, Jayden regarded her father's care as a restriction of freedom and a symbol of excessive control of the problem was compounded by the lack of regular communication with her mother, whom the girl missed deeply. Throughout this led to endless disagreements and misunderstandings. In search of explanation and support, Jayden began to run away from home. This problem, sadly, is extremely prevalent among teenagers. Nevertheless, it is important to note that the girl did not explore the streets or shady companies. Instead, she would instantly run to her mother to spend time in the comfort of her house. At the same time, Jayden did not cease interacting with her father, answered his calls, but at the earliest opportunity wanted to return to her mother, because it was with her that she felt truly loved and understood. Despite all the challenges that the particular link between mother and daughter maintained, it seemed that the struggles of adolescence only deepened there. While during one of these visits to her mother, 14-year-old Jayden met a person named Jake Blakely, and through him his older brother Ben. At that time, Ben was already 20 years old. Despite the large age difference, a mutual desire formed between Jayden and Ben. They chose to try to create a relationship. This decision caused an uncertain reaction in those around them. Some argued that such a choice of partner demonstrated the emotional immaturity of the young man. However, Jayden herself appeared really intrigued by the notion of dating an older guy. However, of course, owing to her age, she still remained inexperienced and could not always cope with her emotions and thoughts. Yet, despite all the warnings, a love relationship full of dreams and expectations for a good future began between these two young people. Jayden dreamed of a happy future without comprehending that her fate was already in the hands of a true monster. From the minute Ben became Jayden's lover, he began to deliberately integrate into her environment, hitting up. He was acquainted with his girlfriend's classmates. Despite the evident disparity in life experience and views, he succeeded in finding a common language with the school students, and even to some extent became a leader for them. Concurrently with this, Ben began to surround Jayden with excessive attention and care, which made the girl fall head over heels in love with him. It appeared that he entirely captured her thoughts and feelings. Ben would tell her about a wonderful future together, sketched vivid fantasies of their life, erected castles in the air. The innocent young Jayden believed it was with him that she would be able to find the happiness that her parents had previously failed to obtain. But the time of romance and carefree life did not endure long. After Ben's behavior began to take on more and more possessive and manipulative qualities, insults and humiliation began. Just a month after the start of their relationship, he first allowed himself to treat Jayden truly brutally. The girl, who found herself in a relationship with a guy for the first time and much older than her, began to hunt for the reasons For such a shift in herself and her probable deficiencies Ben brilliantly utilized. Her uneasiness noticing that Jayden was surrendering to his influence, the girl's naivety, allowed him to find fault with. Whatever minor things in her behavior or remarks, he arranged real emotional swings. For her, at one time he might express how attractive and gorgeous she was, and the next instant accuses her of awful things, especially often jealously, became a foundation for accusations Ben would come up with a multitude of reasons to accuse Jayden of betrayal and deception. It was around this period that the girl found. Learning that her boyfriend was periodically using illegal substances, his emotional instability and mood swings were large. Explained by this fact, but all evidence indicated that verbal abuse would not be restricted to this when Jayden was already strongly hooked to this unhealthy connection. Ben's behavior became extremely violent and abusive once while they were strolling with the girl's group of pals. He began to publicly express his unhappiness with them. This was a common manipulator strategy, trying to isolate his victim from a close environment to isolate her from friends. Regrettably, Jayden did not comprehend what was happening at that time. Each claim or reproach from Ben made her feel guilty. She actually came to feel that it was her actions that were the source of all misunderstandings and disputes. It was then that Jayden finally dared to speak up to her lover. She defended her freedom to interact with pals, which aroused Ben's furious fury, so resorted to a number of deceptive ways to make the girl quarrel with her pal. Jayden tried with all her power to maintain these nice friendships, but gradually everyone began to walk away from her due to the destructive conduct of her boyfriend. Despite everything, feelings for Ben did not fade. However, his behavior became more and more extreme. Once he even allowed himself to slap Jayden in the face, and although it was evident that such behavior could not be justified, Ben managed to convince the girl that she was to blame herself and deserved it. Jayden's family recognized that their daughter and sister were in a poisonous relationship with a very dangerous guy. Her mother and father were frightened about her trying to get through, but the child found in a state of perpetual rupture between family and her adored passion clouded her head, and again. Once again she chose Ben. Gradually his behavior got more and more insufficient and unpredictable, so after one of the quarrels with Jayden, he seized a neighbor's cat and ruthlessly killed it by cut off its head. With this act, Ben intended to take revenge on the girl, so he hurled the head of the defenseless animal onto her bed. Jayden was surprised and horrified by this turn of events, but even after that, Ben managed to confuse her and make her doubt the reality of what transpired. Ben brilliantly played the part of a lover, but behind his lovely grin was the soul of a true artist. Ben did not stop at threatening to deal with Jayden's pet. He went even further, adding that he could just as easily take the life of the girl herself and her entire family. Young Parkinson's, owing to her tiny life experience of simple, could not perceive evidence of a significant mental problem with such behavior, and Ben meanwhile continued to masterfully influence the naive adolescent girl to establish the seriousness of his desire. Once when Jayden again tried to escape out of his absolute grip, the young guy mercilessly dealt with her own cat. The most dreadful thing was that at the same time the animal was pregnant. This awful tragedy became the last straw for Jayden. She finally got convinced that her selected one was a very dangerous guy, yet the girl was absolutely at a loss. She simply did not knowing how to address this situation and stop the relationship without fatal results. Ben kept her close to him, employing all conceivable channels of persuasion. Now threats were added to his arsenal, which became a formidable lever of pressure on the teenager's mentality. In actuality, at that moment, Ben had long been in the field of view of law enforcement officers. The guy's life was pretty terrible and full of criminal adventures. For a long time he was involved in petty offenses for which he constantly got into the police station. Ben was brought up in a foster family where he had incredibly strained interactions with his parents. The man who replaced his own father suffered from alcoholism and more than once subjected the lad to horrific violence in childhood. Ben grew up amid an atmosphere of perpetual terror, humiliation, and beatings, which surely left its mark on his frail child's mentality. Ben's relatives also very quickly realized that their boy was a big danger to others around him. So once when his mother began to voice her discontent with his actions, because of which he again got into difficulties with the law, Ben suddenly exploded in outrage in a fit of insane hatred. The young man grabbed a screwdriver and proceeded to threaten his own mother with physical violence. The woman was shocked and horrified by the notion that a juvenile maniac was living in her house, yet despite this she still opted not file a statement to the police for the time being, but to try to help her kid cope with his troubles on her own. As a result, instead of prison, the child ended up at a psychiatric clinic where a fairly revealing exchange took place with one of the doctors. It is worth noting that at the time of the visit, Ben was still in school, although instead of themes common for his age, the young man proceeded to discuss with the medic how to perform the perfect murder, then get rid of the body and at the same time remain unpunished. It's more terrifying to consider that the youngster was nearly 13 at the time. The comments of the young boy really interested the psychiatrist. He began to probe Ben, seeking to comprehend the way he thinks the doctor believed that such frankness would assist to better understand the boy's diagnosis, but Ben, it seemed, was only too ready to offer his opinions. He freely informed him, in his opinion, the ideal place to hide a body is a freshly dug grave, like burying the dead man quietly for yourself and live in peace there. For sure, no one will guess to look. When Jayden's parents found out about all these scary facts, they firmly decided to put a halt to their daughter's relationship with this dangerous thug who already has the cold-blooded death of pets on his. Since by that time, Ben was already practically openly ridiculing the defenseless girl, it was evident to the naked eye that Jayden was in a highly low emotional state. Every time she was left alone, the schoolgirl would cry. Bitterly, she felt helpless and forced into a corner. She saw no way out of this illness. Love and fervently wanted her tormentor would just depart from her life forever. In turn, Ben tried to isolate Jayden even from her own relatives, wants to completely control absolutely all parts of the young lover's existence. When verbal means of influence did not work, he did not hesitate to resort to plain physical violence. Jayden found herself ensnared by a skilled manipulator, feeling absolutely helpless but continuing to accept his will. The situation progressively worsened with each passing day. Under pressure from Ben, the girl began to take stuff from her own home. The guy, who did not have a permanent job and could not make money on his own, forced his girlfriend to commit a crime. He encouraged Jayden to surreptitiously take various objects out of the house, sell them, and give him all the. By using pressure and intimidation, Ben pushed Jayden to repeatedly lie to her relatives until the family finally spotted the disappearance of several things and exposed the girl. A big conflict broke out in the house. Connections with loved ones worsened substantially, but Jayden did not dare to explain the exact reason for her actions because she was terrified by Ben's rage. Finally, the situation deteriorated to the point that the girl decided to flee away from her father's house. Regrettably, the only place she could move to was her boyfriend's residence. At the time, Ben was staying with his cousin, but just a few weeks after Jayden moved in, the cousin moved away. Later, the girl recounted with what tremendous cruelty Ben treated her throughout that moment. Beatings became a kind of regular ritual for him. At the specified time, he would take Jayden to the restroom, viciously beat her, and then lock her in there for many hours. The 16-year-old girl found herself in a dismal situation and simply did not know what to do next. She did not dare to return home because her folks had caught her stealing. In addition, Ben threatened her if she fled, he will kill her entire family. From now on, Ben controls literally every step of his girl. He continually insulted her and inflicted bodily anguish, even yanked out her hair, which gave a crushing blow to Jayden's self-esteem. The guy was jealous of her, of every passerby, crazy, condemning her even for an inadvertent glance in the direction of another person. At the same time, he himself constantly cheated on Jayden and even had a connection with his brother's girl, which plainly reveals the exceedingly poor moral traits of this guy. Despite the regular shows of cruelty, Jayden continued to sustain this toxic connection. She lived in continual worry that Ben would really carry out his threats and ruthlessly deals with her entire family. Meanwhile, his hold over the girl only intensifies when it comes to the point that when he woke up in the morning, Ben would first lock Jayden in the room and only then go about his business or have fun for whatever action, even the slightest. The female had to get his permission, of course. Under such conditions, she could not study properly throughout her whole life. It was being destroyed before her eyes, but a blind feeling for the manipulator and all-consuming terror filled her thinking, not allowing her to effectively judge reality. Each new day brought Jayden fresh anguish, but the most terrible test was yet to come. Beatings became a vital part of Jayden's life. They occurred with terrible regularity. Ben did not shy away from all tactics of violence. He strangled the girl, gave blows with his fists, tossed her to the floor, and savagely pushed her with his foot. 2 years had gone by since the beginning of their toxic relationship, and Jayden's life had turned into a true hell. Until then, a ray of hope came amid this darkness. Jayden's mother, seeing the full nature of the issue, decided to take her daughter to herself. At all Cost, she made every effort to soothe the child down and persuade her to entirely sever all links with the abuser but Jayden. They always showed a rebellious character in the community interacting with her relatives and considered her mother's persuasion very unpleasant simply. Days passed, and she returned to her abuse again. The girl became so emotionally reliant on this monster. Even under the danger of reprisals against her family, she did not dare to leave him, although deep down she passionately wanted to. Of course, no positive improvements occurred. The moral and physical violence only increased the speed. And then in November 2013, Jayden made a desperate attempt to break this harmful relationship once and for all. However, fear for the safety of loved ones, one did not allow her to come home. Instead, the girl resorted to hiding in a homeless shelter. Clearly, this is not the greatest decision for a youngster, but Jayden honestly believed that the professionals of the institution would be able to provide her with the required aid and protection. Most crucially, her ex-boyfriend would not be able to find her there. Unfortunately, these aspirations turned out to be futile. Ben tracked down Jayden rather soon. He often visited the shelter, continuing to force his will on the girl. It came to the point of ridiculousness. Ben even forbade her to visit the toilet. At first, Jayden accepted this humiliating command, but later she dared to defy it in the refuge. The girl had the opportunity to communicate with the staff, and experienced personnel exposed her eyes to the reality that she was in an highly hazardous and terrible dependence on an abuser person, a great manipulator. They convinced Jayden that such a toxic environment produced by Ben could hardly be deemed normal under any conditions. Eventually, the girl began to the revelation that she was not obligated to fulfill all the instructions and whims of her ex, to observe his cruel rules. For the first time in a long time, Jayden has a real opportunity to repair the faults of the past and hope for a happy future settled in her heart again. But at the same time, Ben began to see that his ex-girlfriend was progressively getting out of control. This aroused a passionate wrath and hunger for retribution in him. It was the idea that Jayden had gotten herself a new boyfriend without spending time with Ben and began to send threats, striving to re-establish his power and return the girl to the typical framework of a poisonous relationship. He even succeeded to gradually scare away Jayden's new chosen one, who, scared by the magnitude of the threats, opted not to take risks and not mess with the deadly rival. But Ben was not going to stop there. He decided to throw a crushing blow to the reputation of his former girlfriend by publishing her intimate images and videos on the internet, which he took without the girl's consent for the whole length of their relationship. It found out that he had amassed with a large collection of similar items. Ben's ultimate purpose was to drive Jayden to despair and push her to commit suicide. Unfortunately, at that time, the legislation did not give any liability for the disclosure of other people's private materials. Only in 2015 did such behaviors begin to qualify as crimes on sexual grounds, for which a punishment of 2 years in prison was provided. So in 2013, when the described events transpired, Ben truly stayed out of reach for justice. Even nowadays, it is exceedingly difficult to show guilt in such circumstances, and in the full lack of a regulatory framework, it completely impossible. Jayden could only watch helplessly as the perpetrator wrecked her reputation. Yet the largest shock was waiting for the girl ahead. Despite all the taunting, she did not surrender to despair and did not take her own life. However, a few weeks after parting up with Ben, Jayden got out about her pregnancy. The girl did not even think about getting rid of the child. On the contrary, she hoped that the appearance of a common baby would help overcome all conflicts and awaken the best feelings in Ben's heart and return their relationship to a normal trajectory. It seemed that parenthood could soften Ben's heart, yet this delusion very rapidly broke into smither. Despite all the anguish and the humiliation that Jayden had to undergo, she could not forget about the issues in her own family created by her parents' divorce. The girl honestly believed that every child needs the love and care of both parents. That is why in December 3rd, 2013, she ventured to phone Ben to inform him about her precarious predicament and call him the father of the unborn baby. It is worth noting that for this talk, Jayden had to utilize someone else's phone because Ben had swiped her mobile from her and had not returned it. Upon getting the news of the pregnancy, the guy refused to believe his ex-girlfriend. Jayden desperately wanted to convince him that she had not been intimate with anybody else, so she could not get pregnant by someone else. But all her explanations fell with a wall of skepticism, Ben stubbornly accused the girl of trying to draw him into a trap by putting someone else's child on him. Ben's reaction appeared unusual at the very least, because up to that time he had been constantly watching his old lover, probably the guy once again trying to make Jayden feel terrible and thus regulate her emotions and decisions, be that as it may as a result of this tension. Conversation, then young people decided on a personal meeting in order to discuss everything in detail the day before. Jayden visited with her mother and told her about her pregnancy. The girl assured her mother that she finally felt free and glad. Since Ben allegedly left her alone, the woman was really happy at her daughter's decision because she had long attempted to encourage her to break off this toxic connection, seeing how harmful Ben could be. That day, mother and daughter chatted for a long time about Jayden's current life and her aspirations for the future. They even promised to go to the store together in the near future to acquire the necessary things for the unborn kid, but the twist of fate, Jayden never told her mother about the awful facts of her ex-boyfriend's actions and the plan. Meeting him, the fact is that the girl was terrified of Ben's reaction. She did not want to endanger her mother knowing about his hostile temperament. Around 3:30 p.m., 17-year-old Jayden headed to meet with Ben, full of hopes and aspirations. This meeting must be crucial. The girl's future life and that of her unborn child relied on it. The former lovers met at Oxford Station, getting caught on CCTV cameras. Further, Ben and Jayden's path went to the countryside near Didcot. The trusting girl believed the guy's assertions that they were heading for a gorgeous picnic where they may chat honestly in an atmosphere of peace and unity with nature. Jayden was last seen alive at Didcot Station. This moment was also filmed by CCTV cameras. From the very beginning of this disastrous meeting, Ben's behavior sounded arrogant and nasty. He continued to accuse Jayden of lying about her pregnancy, denied any of the girl's attempts to substantiate her case. Eventually, the young people reached a remote field, which is Ben's opinion was intended to be the best venue for a frank chat, but in fact the guy brought Jayden was here for a whole other purpose, carefully checking about and making sure that they were left alone. Ben led Jayden to an old abandoned barn, suspecting nothing. The girl obediently stepped inside, not even understanding her companion's actual intentions. No one could believe what Ben was capable of. His act eternally changed the path of this story. Once in the barn, Ben abruptly changed his conduct. Filled with unrestrained aggression, he began to aggressively accuse Jayden of betraying, alleging that the pregnancy was an insidious result of her infidelity. The guy's fury steadily escalated, reaching its apex in a matter of minutes. Finally, he pounced on the helpless girl who had so carelessly trusted him. With few hard swings, Ben knocked Jayden off her feet. She tumbled to the ground, and at that time, the infuriated sadist lunged at her, grasping her throat with his hands. He squeezed her neck with incredible strength, while the poor girl anxiously struggled to get free from this lethal hold. Yet it was in vain. Jayden progressively lost vigor, no longer displaying signs of life and ultimately releasing her weary body. Ben took out his mobile phone and, using the screen, checked whether his victim was still breathing. Making sure that the female was dead, he eventually calmed down. The goal was during the subsequent inquiry, forensic specialists were unable to clearly prove that Jayden was genuinely pregnant at the time of the murder. There remained a possibility that the pregnancy test may have been fake. Perhaps the girl purposefully misled Ben, intending in this way to soften his attitude toward her and create a relationship. Be that as it may, it was no longer feasible for anyone to find out the truth. Now Ben faced the crucial requirement to get rid of the body. Suddenly he found himself in a predicament that he had long dreamed of in his perverse dreams: to perform the perfect murder and get away with it. But in a frenzy of retribution against Jayden, he does not think about the tools with which he could cover up the signs of the crime. Recognizing that he did not even have a shovel at hand, Ben chose return home for the essential materials. The footage from the CCTV cameras at the railway station clearly reveals how the killer returns alone from the fields and boards a train again. Only a few days later, he again attended the crime scene, but this time not alone, but with his younger brother Jake. The lad had recently turned 17. He had, with utterly immaculate reputation, he had never been observed in connection with the criminal world or any illegal acts. But despite this, the older brother without hesitation made Jake an involuntary accomplice in his horrible Truth, it is quite likely that the child simply did not dare to refuse Ben, even considering the dubiousness of his request. Arriving at the spot, Ben imperiously told Jake to dig a big hole near the barn where the murder took place. The child, faithfully following the command, maybe thinking that disobedience could cost him his health or even his life, when Jake asked about the purpose of the pit, Ben claimed that he meant to hide a weapon there. Of course, this explanation did not sound as creepy as the need to hide the body of a murdered girl. Nevertheless, despite his fake gullibility, the younger brother almost instantly realized something was wrong, and yet he decided to remain silent and continue to. Excavation of the pit was ready, and Ben hastily bidden goodbye to his brother and threw Jayden's bloodied body into it, and then swiftly covered it with earth. But even with that, the eerie narrative did not finish. In Ben's head darkened by painful fantasies, another nasty plan blossomed. On December 9th, 6 days after the murder, he came to the pit and pulled up the already half-decomposed body of his ex-girlfriend. Ben had an old grandmother's suitcase with him in which he was going to store the remains of the sad Jayden. With despicable disregard, threw the body into the luggage, giving it an abnormality bent stance. After that, about 1 in the morning, Ben stopped a taxi. The driver saw a strange young man with a massive luggage standing on the side of the road in the middle of the night, all drenched in dirt and with untidy hair. For some reason, did not suspect anything wrong. He obediently drove the client to the nearest church on the territory of which there was an old cemetery. As it turned out later, it was there that Ben had dug a burial for his victim in advance. The most astonishing fact was that the murderer, the younger brother, was involved in excavating this grave. This time, Ben lied to Jake that he was going to bury some dead animal at the graveyard. The study suggested that the only cause for such implicit complicity of the youngster in his brother's crimes were the tremendous terror of taking the place of one of the victims. It's hard to believe, but Ben, he cooked up a full story to justify his actions by hiding the body. He stated that he regarded it unworthy to bury his ex-lover someplace in a field like some dead animal. Therefore, he apparently planned to bury her in a human fashion in a cemetery in the grave of someone close. Meanwhile, Jayden's relatives were frightened because the child had disappeared without a trace. She did not answer calls and disregarded any messages. The mother of the poor girl tried to find her through friends checking the shelter where she lived, but all attempts in vain. Jayden's phone remained with Ben, who later simply sold the gadget, entirely depriving the missing girl's relatives of the option to contact her. On December 4th, 2013, the Parkinson family eventually turned to the police with a statement concerning Jayden's disappearance. Law enforcement officers quickly began an investigation. They interviewed the girl's relatives and acquaintances, issued flyers with her photographs, and involved volunteers in the search operation of approximately 100 police. Police were part of these searches. They combed the region, inspected the territory from the air, reviewed CCTV cameras throughout the city, and at some point the first warning signs began to appear, which showed the involvement of the girl's ex-boyfriend in her disappearance. As a result of all the evidence brought the investigators to the doorstep of Ben's house based on the information acquired by the police, accused the young man kidnapping Jayden, although from the start moment he began to deny that he had seen the girl on the day of her disappearance. Of course, the investigators did not accept a single word of his because they had heard a lot significant evidence about how Ben spoke and behaved with Jayden shortly before her abduction, and the CCTV footage contradicted by his statements trying to convince the cops of his non-involvement. Ben began to get irritated, shout, and even permitted himself veiled threats against law enforcement officers. It seemed that the individual did not recognize how serious the situation was, and with whom he was conversing during interrogations. The suspect behaved incredibly arrogantly and fiercely. This further strengthened the suspicions of the police. They suspected that Ben was plainly hiding something. Throughout interrogations, the young man tried to convince the investigation that he had split with Jayden long ago because she no longer interested him, and hence he had no idea where she could be. Yet since the girl had been missing more than a week ago, the cops began to contemplate the worst-case scenario. Jayden was not longer alive. The progress of the probe was actively reported in the media, which eventually bore fruit in the cab driver who had provided Ben a ride with a heavy bag to the church cemetery that fateful night called The police individual recognized the main suspect and wanted to relate his memories of those events having received this information. The detectives, together with the dog handlers, went to investigate the site specified by the taxi driver. Soon, in an old barn near the chapel, a bag was found that absolutely fit the description of the one that Ben was carrying. In a taxi in parallel, there was a shift in the talk with the suspect's brother. The older brother had twice forced him to dig holes in odd places, but he did not explain what for. All these factors made it possible on December 19th, on the eve of Christmas, to find the body of the missing girl. This day eternally clouded the life of the Parkinson family. The autopsy of Jayden's body, done by a forensic specialist, showed that the cause of the girl's death was strangling on her face and head. Rather significant injuries were detected, the type of which indicated severe hits with a fist or foot. The official identification of the deceased was carried out by her mother, who was forced to undergo the harshest the thing that can happen to parents, to bury their own child while awaiting court hearings. Ben was in custody. It was during this point that he drafted a confession to the crime he had committed. Nevertheless, the main line of his defense was the remark that he could not be held liable for the murder because of his purported mental disorder apparent in this method. The defendant sought to evade punishment. Psychiatric examination were ordered, which disproved his statements. According to specialists, at the time of the murder, the young man was fully aware of his actions. Ben was charged not only with deliberate murder, but also with desecrating the body of the deceased. His lawyer maintained that the defendant had no criminal intent when he traveled with his ex-girlfriend to a remote countryside. They apparently simply meant to talk. Likewise, the defense refuted the facts regarding Ben's brutal treatment of Jayden, yet throughout the investigation, several witnesses were located who disclosed the entire level of the accused's cruelty towards the deceased. About 10 people from Jayden's circle confirmed that they had regularly witnessed indications of beatings on the girl's body, noticed striking alterations in her conduct under the effect of Ben's psychological manipulations. But the most horrifying facts were revealed in their judgments by forensic experts. Experts were certain that the accused strangled his victim at least 3 times, each time bringing her to her senses. Obviously, he did it for the sake of perverse enjoyment. Throughout the trial, the defendant exhibited no signs of sorrow. He may suddenly chuckle, creating an inappropriate joke, and then abruptly become upset and start criticizing everyone present. Once Ben even threatened the prosecutor with physical assault. Of course, such actions only exacerbated his position and convinced the jury of the utter incompetence of the accused. When the court sessions were over, the jurors met for a meeting to make a verdict. The discussion lasted around 20 hours. As a result, 11 out of 12 members of the tribunal found Ben guilty of premeditated murder. When the judge was ready to announce the verdict, the convicted man, through a serious fury, he yelled "riot" in spasms and accused Jayden of conspiring against him. Despite all this, Ben believed that he deserved the death penalty. He said that he sees the slain girl in his dreams, but since 2003 in the United Kingdom, the greatest measure of punishment is life imprisonment. The judge highlighted that the condemned person poses a serious danger to society. Ben was sentenced to the maximum penalty of life imprisonment, with the ability to challenge the sentence no early than after 20 years after the end of the process. Over Jayden's murderous difficulties began with his younger brother Jake struggling for a long time to explain that he did not directly participation in the murder and aided in getting rid of the body against his will. Eventually, he managed to convince the jury that he had become a victim of psychological pressure from his older brother and had been in fear the whole moment. He was terrified that Ben might hurl him into one of those pits. Jayden Parkinson's relatives voiced the wish that her killer would never be released, since he is an incredibly dangerous person. The girl's mother is convinced that the topic of domestic violence should be highlighted in school so that young females are aware of and beware of any symptoms of abuse in relationships, should not get engaged with individuals who are prone to manipulation, and undoubtedly this story will forever leave an impact in the hearts of everyone who heard it. But the most important question is what lessons we will gain from it. Post your comments under the video, support it with a like. I hope that after this you will pay greater attention to your loved ones, and of course subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, intriguing and informative stories from real life that we carefully select for you. Take care of yourself. I love you all.